In this video, we open up to day 5, which is dealing with the transcendental realm of meaning, which sublates the core level of the institution, which in turn sublates the standing wave level of matter and energy that supports our entire civilization. This is just to let you know what's happening. We're going to deal with 6 different categories. The first one is that humans are not born good. The second is that our default self is our animal self, a psychic and conscious intervention, with a contemporary example drawn from Muslim countries. The third one is how to explain the existence of good in the world, which is quite different than figuring that everything is good and then it's a default into evil. The fourth thing is the emergent probability, where the dynamics of the transcendental realm work themselves out through positions and counterpositions in history. Then we deal with manifestations of the divine mystery in human affairs, 3 different types: the church, the devotees belong to a church, and then contemplatives that seek some sort of direct contact with God. And finally, we end up with a few of the fundamental institutional changes that involve the transcendental realm and the position of the divine mystery in human affairs. So with that, stay tuned. We shall go into the details in a moment. Today we continue from last week's introduction to the core level of the institutional level of human affairs, from the global to the regional to the local, with some of the major changes going on and the way it sublates the standing wave energy model for the sublation or the conditioning level that stands below the core level of the institutions. Today we're taking an initial look at the transcendental realm and its sublating effect on human affairs, human history, human institutions, and so forth. As stated at the beginning, this will be broken down into 6 different sections. I shall try to be as brief as possible, giving you an outline. There's a bit more details in the notes, but again, consider this simply an initial starting point that will be modified as we continue our investigation into the question of fake news in this particular instance. Our first point is that individuals or human beings are not born good. Doesn't mean they're born evil, but it does mean that we're born essentially as animals. And animals have their own self-interests, they have their own objectives in terms of food, mating, and so forth. And, if you lie or cheat or whatever to get what you want, that's fine. It's the seeking to maximize the biological imperatives in basically being an animal. Now, a lot of this is embedded in the psychic of the individual, and it's still operative throughout a person's life, because this psychic level deals with scarcity, it deals with loss, it deals with death, and all the different factors ranged from that. But it basically identifies a world of scarcity, of lack, of need, of wants, of desires, and so forth. This is quite in opposition to the transcendental realm of meaning, which emphasizes a very different way of being in the world. The point I'd like to make is that although we have an innate drive towards the good through the transcendental precepts, the fact that good in the world is not automatic. It is not a foundational stance. It is actually something to be explained because the basic root conditions are very different. Through most of human history, as far as we can tell, going back generations upon generations upon generations since the beginning of our species, things like slavery, the owning of other people, the subordination of women, the dominance of alpha males and alpha females too as well, The ability for alpha males to to father a lot of children compared to the males that are low on the ranking, which leads, when they gain power, to the creation of harems. It also is a raiding. Hunting, gathering communities and even small farming communities always exercised a low-level warfare in which about 1% of the males in any particular tribe would be killed every year. This is anthropological research is now coming out. So there's a constant degree of low-level raiding that's embedded into human behavior. Also, we're very intersubject. Our degree of intersubjectivity is very high. But this is localized largely around family, first of all, and then perhaps to the tribe that the family belongs to, and then perhaps to a larger extent the clan. But it is a way of arranging human affairs around the intersubjectivity, the connections between people who have a family relationship. Now, immediate family or distant family in a clan, it's still a family relationship. In fact, the individual is not as important as belonging to a particular clan, a tribe, or a family. The individual as an individual and a value in itself is really not a part of most of human history. Most of human history considers individuals not as individuals, but as simply components of a family, a tribe, or a clan. To get an idea of the default condition of what it means to be human, we have a good contemporary example, much as it may be a little bit unnerving to people. It's a thing of major issue in today's age. But I'm postulating that if you really want an example of just a kind of a contemporary example of a pure human-based way of living, then you need to look no further than Muslim countries that are ruled under Sharia, where there's a totalitarian ideology, and where Muhammad is the ideal man. And man it is, woman is not a part of this at all. And the ideal man, because Muhammad was both a warlord, and he was high priest, and he was a Supreme Court judge. He embodied all the power and authority within the collective. The characteristics of these are, first of all, it's based on a tribal mentality, which goes from family to tribe to clan to ultimately to the caliphate. The difference is that within this system of organizing, the head of the family or the head of the clan, the head of the tribe, the caliphate, all have the right to use violence against people under their jurisdiction or that they are responsible for. Although responsibility is a bit of a misnomer in this particular case. So it's quite under the system, and it's quite valid for honor killings, in which maybe one's daughter dates somebody that they shouldn't be dating, or they're dating, period. And to save the family honor, they're killed. There's a variety of things like that. But it's very different. It's the alpha male idea. And in fact, the Muslim society or Islamic society seems to be an ideal way, the best way to generate alpha males. It loses a lot of other values in the process, but it seems to be geared up for the developing of alpha males. Also, within Muslim countries, there's a very strong hierarchy, a dominance hierarchy, that leads from Allah all the way down to the caliph, and then this goes down through the tribe. In each case, Allah is considered all-powerful, and the whole meaning of the word Islam is obedience. The caliphate or the caliph in a caliphate is due absolute obedience from all his subjects, no matter what he does, even if it seems to go against Muslim or Islamic practices. He is owed total and complete obedience. And in some ways, it goes down through the line all the way down to the family. The alpha males are an evolution of this in the sense that in this quest for power and dominance, even for the basic survival of your family and your clan, you have to engage in this low-level conflict between, let's say, within a family, between different family members, in a tribe, between different families within the tribe, and in a clan, between the different tribes within the clan, and so forth, as you go up the hierarchy. So this selects for the aggressive alpha males who are capable of exercising violence and who can also exercise a certain amount of deceit and political awareness in a very shifting environment, because there's no real common law that provides a common way of understanding the situation as such. It is all a very fluid situation in which there's a constant jostling for power. And this supports the development of alpha males. It also subordinates females. Females are definitely, wouldn't even call second-class citizens, they're like third-class citizens. They have far less voting rights or far less rights in a court, far less, they can inherit far less than their male siblings. They're also, there's the female genital mutilation, which is actually part of it. There's also the burqas, the niqabs, and so forth that subordinate the women to and sequester them within the family unit. So if they go outside of the family, they have to have a male permission to do so, and perhaps even be escorted by a male relative. This is all kind of part of this. The Muslim law, Islamic law, is not a law as Western civilization would conceive it. It's more a question of religious interpretation. You have an issue, a legal issue that needs to be adjudicated. What you do is you don't go to a legal system, you go to the Quran, the Hadith, and then you make an official interpretation of what this means in the context in which you're asking the question. Then this becomes a fatwa and is propagated as such. But Sharia itself does contain the certain fundamentals, no matter which of the two or the three fundamental forms of Sharia. They all agree on a couple of very fundamental factors. One of which is that there's a strong conflict between the brotherhood of Muslims and anybody who else is not a Muslim. The people of the book, which in this case is Jews and Christians, are allowed to exist, but only if they show themselves submissive in regards to it. And they're not allowed to add or repair any of the churches or synagogues. They have to be left as they is, and as they degrade, well, you can't do anything about them. There's also a general tendency that comes out when they talk about conflict. It's that the attitude from the Muslim side of things is that they prefer, and this is in the Palestinian case in particular, is that they prefer death over life, whereas the Israelis prefer life over death. And this preference for death, no matter what, gives the Muslim identity a power in itself. The final thing that I'd like to mention is that Muslims support slavery, both in terms of their ideological terms, both in the terms of following Muhammad's own example. And slavery is alive and well these days in Muslim worlds, particularly since Western cultures are tending to move away from Muslim countries. And you can see this very well these days in Libya, which is largely under Muslim rule, although the rule by Muslims is split up among very different conflicting groups. But still there's this common agreement about slavery, the owning of slaves, the taking of slaves in warfare, and so forth. So if you want an understanding of the default situation of what it means to be human, there's probably about the best way to look at it. The best place to go to observe the details of this human-created religion. Really a totalitarian ideology that's been framed in religious terms that gives it incredible power and depth as a warfaring nation, but little else than that. Now, take this with a grain of salt. This is my own opinion after 9/11 and studying some of the material and also reflecting on the matter and paying attention to current affairs too as well. So I think it's reasonable, but again, I'm going to leave it in your hands as to whether or not it's a valid example or not. The third thing is how do you explain the presence of good? If, for example, a Muslim society is the basic root condition of being human and the way humans organize themselves in collectives, then how do you explain the fact that there are civilizations that have gotten rid of slavery, that have tended to pick up on the importance of the individual not as a clan member or tribe member or family member, but as an individual in their own right? Who have evolved over time legal institutions to protect that individuality and in fact to encourage it. The only way, the explanation that I have for this is that the divine mystery is operative and at play in human history. And it is this impact of the divine mystery on human beings that explains the infusion of good into human affairs. And we'll deal with this, first of all, in the category of revelation. Now, we're not talking about Hinduism or any of the other religions, Confucianism and so forth, that had developed. Our primary interest and our primary responsibility in this sense is revelation, and there are only three major religions that claim revelation. One is the Jews, the other is the Christians, and then finally we have Muslims. We can take it from my other comments that Muslims' revelation is a self-revelation of what it means to be human from a human perspective. There's no divine in this at all. Now, again, this is an issue that's up for debate, and how that's resolved over the incoming decades and centuries perhaps is going to make a major change on Western life and global life, human life in general. So it's an issue. This is my position on it at the moment. We can start with revelation, but revelation reveals something, a set of values, a different way of being in the world that's quite different from the world that emerges from the human experience of scarcity, of death, of loss, of need, of want, of desires, and so forth. That is very much a part of our animal existence, and which is carried over into our conscious level of being. The revelation itself provides an alternative way of being in the world. And particularly they're Jewish or Christian, they're quite distinct, but they're still grounded both in the original revelation that was made through the Jews, starting with Abraham and working up through Moses at Mount Sinai. The revelation itself attests to the reality, or to a transcendental reality beyond that of human affairs. And it is a reality that is better, shall we say, than the reality conceived by humans. But it is quite different. And the difference is something that human beings, as they encounter this revelation, then begin over hundreds and thousands of years to unpack the meaning of this, doing so under the general guidance again of the divine mystery. And this guidance operates largely through the transcendental precepts of consciousness, of being open to experience, of being intelligent and understanding, being reasonable in one's judgments, and being responsible when it comes to determining what to do. This is the arena in which the divine mystery can infuse a person's very essential being, so that they come closer to what Lonergan calls the three basic types of conversion: intellectual conversion, away from naive realism, empiricism, conceptualism, and over to a critical realism, to a moral conversion in which it is more important for the individual to meet the obligations of something truly of value, like truth and justice, rather than their own personal satisfactions. And then religious conversion, which is this falling in love with God, or God experiencing God's love of you. And this is expressed largely in charity, when it comes down to the actual interplay of human beings. And we'll get into this at a particular stage. But the choice, the way in which this happens is through formulation. In a sense, where human beings are undergoing a process of formulation of our very fundamental selves and our way of being in the world. And it is a shift away from this animal world of scarcity and loss to a divine reality in which everything is just fine the way that it is, that charity is above all the most important thing in the world, and that individuals are individuals and due the individual respect of every other individual simply because they are, in some sense, a mirror of God, created in the image of God, as they would say. And of course, one of the ways in which this is expressed is through wisdom literature. And I have just a few general quotes from this. As David Prentice points out in Wisdom and the Smartest People Ever, he says, culturally valuing knowledge and intelligence has three main sources: the Greek philosophers, the Bible, and the Church. There were others, but these three, more than any other sources, provide the basis for the respect for knowledge and wisdom in our culture. Wisdom is the subject of Solomon in the book of Proverbs. Some central quotes: seek wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. Find wisdom, though it costs you all you have. Get understanding. Does not wisdom call out? Choose my instruction instead of silver, knowledge rather than choice gold, for wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Our fourth section of this video deals with emergent probability. And this is the realization that different schemes of recurrence that individuals or groups propose have a probability of emergence, and then once they emerge, if they do, a probability of survival. Now, these probabilities are heavily influenced by whether or not the issue at hand is dealt with through a position or a counterposition, which is another way of saying that there are important issues that need to be dealt with in a culture. And as people engage with these issues and try to find their own position on them, basically there's two different forms that come out. One is what we call in Lonergan circles a position, and a position is something that's based on a conversion of intellectual, moral, and religious conversion, and to the degree those conversions are authentic, then the position is sound. It may still require more development, it may still need to be modified, but the foundational roots of that position are sound. What this means is that once these recurring schemes of operations built upon these positions are put into practice, they can be improved, but they still have a high probability of survival because at their core they are sound positions. The same does not apply to counterpositions. Counterpositions are generated by people who are not intellectually converted, have no particular sense of morals, either egotistically or a group bias, and certainly have no love for the divine mystery itself. There's no religious conversion, there's no falling in love with God. So there's a whole multiple ways now. We're not talking about one specific root system, we're talking about a whole variety of different counterpositions that can be developed around the individual. But they all share one common feature. because they're not grounded in human authenticity. They're not grounded in intellectual, moral, or religious conversion. These counterpositions can only be overturned. They cannot be improved. What this means is that if a group or a civilization or a culture decides that they are going to implement a scheme of reoccurrence based on a counterposition, they may get it going, but its chances of survival is extremely limited. So over time, these fundamental flaws will work themselves out, and the system or the scheme will simply disintegrate. It may cause a lot of confusion, it may take a lot of people down with it, but essentially it will in the end simply be overturned. So a good example of this is Marxism, the socialism that came out of it. Now, for almost 2 centuries now, socialism has been tried by different groups, notably Russia. It ended up with Stalin. It was a complete failure with famines, the Gulag archipelago, and so forth. It was then tried by China under Mao Zedong. And China really, under the Cultural Revolution, there were over 100 million people apparently that were killed or died as a result of this Cultural Revolution and the attempt to impose socialism on the Chinese culture. If you want a more modern example, you could take the case of Venezuela, where the socialist policies have totally destroyed the oil industry, not to mention all the other ones too as well. But their main, what is essentially a very wealthy, resource-wealthy country, cannot develop the recurring schemes that allow them to make use of or to actualize the resource wealth that they have. So at the moment, I think the reflation rate is something like 10,000% every month or so. The currency is worth nothing. In fact, there's artists that will actually make artifacts like purses and so forth out of the money, because the money they can make from the purse is more than the value of the money that they're using to make the purse. So this is how it gets played out in the institutional realm, at the core realm. It comes out through this interplay of positions and counterpositions, their basic authenticity or lack of it, the survivability of it, the damage that they do when implemented, and so forth. So this is part of the dynamic. This is how the transcendental realm, in this case, sublates the core institutional realm that we are talking about. Our next section is the manifestations. How does this divine mystery manifest itself in human affairs? And our initial stab at this identifies 3 primary modes in which the divine mystery operates. The first is through the church itself, or in the case of Judaism, the synagogues and so forth. But it deals with an institutionalized form of religion that does not belong to the individual, is not an individual thing, neither is a clan or a tribe. It is a religion that's become formalized and clarified over millennium to pull out its core essential meanings and interpretations and understanding of reality, not as a value system, but as a way of existing, of being in the world. Now, the church itself gives witness to the possibility that the transcendental realm does exist and that there is a divine mystery operative in human affairs. So within the world at large, these religious institutions bear witness to a reality beyond that of purely human creation. And that is probably one of the most important elements that the church can do, other than providing the resources, the introduction to this realm of meaning, this transcendental realm of meaning, as it has been worked out over generations through the development of that particular tradition. The church also bears witness to a set of values, or to an appreciative system that evaluates the condition of society around it. Now, this is an important component of the church, or of the Jewish synagogues and so forth, because what it does is that it not only bears witness to the realm of the transcendental and the possibility the divine mystery actually exists, it actually gives witness to a set of values that would not normally be inherent as emerging from the animal elements of our very being as we're born and as we grow into mature individuals and so forth. So it has an evaluative aspect that starts to distinguish what is really truly of value from what is apparently of value. And this is important because the apparent value often is that of a counterposition, whereas the true value leads to the development of positions. So it's important for that particular reasons. The third element of the church is that it provides a way for the formation of individuals, for the formation of families, for the formation of religious communities too as well. So there emerges over time this traditional way of bringing people into the reality of what it means to be a Christian or what it means to be Jewish, and to do so in such a way that it forms their very being. It modifies their feelings, it changes what they value, and associates good feelings with what is truly of value, and so forth. So this formation aspect, potential there for the church and for the Jewish synagogues is a major, major force at the level of the church or the synagogues themselves. The second major influence of the transcendental realm, the divine mystery, is on the devotees who choose or decide to devote their lives to living out the life of their particular religious stance, be it Judaism or Christianity. And these are people who take up the task of maintaining and encouraging the church, but even more than that, they give a personal expression to the reality of the divine mystery in people's lives through their own transformation, through their own formation, through their own shift in values, through their own different appreciative system, which can stand in contrast with the appreciation system, let's say, of most secular individuals. Although, strictly speaking, secular individuals still have a transcendental realm aspect to them, they just simply don't realize it. The individual devotee can attest to the intellectual, moral, and religious conversion that is possible. So that conversion itself becomes not just a theoretical element, but can be seen or being viewed or experienced by others as a reality that they themselves can participate in, or at least have an opportunity to participate in through the formational practices of their churches or their synagogues. These devotees are important because in many ways they are the ones that carry the message of the church or of the synagogues into the world at large, not in an effort to convince others per se, but simply by giving witness to the value shifts of their particular religion in the different situations in which they are in. So this gives witness to the reality of the transcendental realm and of the divine mystery to people that otherwise might not be at all interested or even be aware of it. But in the encounter with these people in their daily lives, in work, in play, in sports, whatever it is, this encounter can be a magnificent way for the divine mystery to enter into the reality of people who may not consciously recognize it, but yet are still in some ways primed by the very fact that they are human and are subject in many ways to the transcendental precepts. They're primed for this type of awareness. It's something that humans seek. The third form that the divine mystery can manifest itself in human affairs is known in Christian is known in circles as mysticism, or perhaps better, contemplatives. And in this case, I draw upon the work of Thomas Merton, in particular with Inner Experiences, where he talks about contemplatives as having three primary identifiable factors. One is which they have a divinized subjectivity, which is something that you probably wouldn't understand unless you've actually experienced it. But this is this intersubject relationships that each individual has with another when encountering another one is now somehow divinized, and this is expressed through charity. So the expression of pure charity is an important element in which it becomes communicated, because the divine mystery is itself an example of pure charity. So this is carried over into human affairs through contemplatives that may not be actively involved in either the church, but still by their very existence attest to the reality of it. Another factor is that such contemplatives have an inability to understand the divine mystery or its even working through conceptual terms. There seems to be a very deep experiential understanding in which such statements as Christ and I are one, or we are divine in our very core, have a deep meaning, but yet are totally nonsense when expressed in terms of human concepts. So the other aspect of it, of contemplative, this level of divine mystery incursion into the world, is by the external and internal darkness. Probably it's a cloud of unknowing that is often talked about. But in this case, what you're experiencing, if you meet somebody like that, or if you read anything about it, you're encountering the really totally radical shift between our conceptual understanding of the world, which is based around human concerns, which are in turn grounded on human animal realities, into a realm of meaning that literally lies beyond human comprehension. But contemplatives can give expression to this in such a way that the charity becomes reflected in all that they do. And this charity is a direct flow of the divine mystery into the human affairs. The third aspect of a contemplative in this sense is, according to Thomas Merton, is that there's a total transformation of the individual as he or she is drawn into the life of the Trinity. Now in this case we're talking particularly about Christianity rather than Judaism. The expression there shall we say, a little different, but it is still some sort of encounter. Although Judaism tends to frown upon mysticism, it's something that they say you should only get into if you're a mature adult, already raised a family, and you're at that point, then yes, it's okay, but normal Jewish life does not advocate mysticism as something that's desirable for people to get into. The total transformation of the individual is also a reality that reflects not only in the individual's own time and space situation, but it also, because it belongs to the eternal aspect of the transcendental realm, is spread throughout history. So the impact of such an individual may not be very much when it turns in terms of their localized existence, but potentially the very fact that they have been invited into it and loved so deeply by the divine realm that they are brought into the transcendental realm as a very functioning power. So we can consider these three ways in which the transcendental mystery has a way of manifesting itself in the world, through the church or through the synagogues, through the individuals who devote their lives to being devotees of church or synagogues, and to the contemplatives, these mystics who have some sort of direct experience of God, and through that direct experience of God are changed in such a fundamental way that other people can only stand, I don't know whether the word is of awe, but certainly are astounded by. such a transformation. And this brings us to our final section on the fundamental institutional changes currently involved at the core level. Changes that are kind of particular in some ways to our own time. The first of these is that in the Western world in particular, there's a downgrading of religious institutions from an institutional status to an organizational status. So churches are becoming like organizations that can fail. It doesn't really make a difference. A new religion will pop up in its place, or a new church will pop up in its place. There's no institutional drive of resources to facilitate the continuing on of a religious institution. So that's a kind of a major change. It's not the same in all societies. Some others are becoming more and more institutionalized in terms of their religion. These are, we could say, are more the traditional orientated societies that have yet to enter into the wealth creating industrialized mentality of the West. Well, for good or for evil. Another fundamental institutional change in the Western world, at least, is that the elites have lost all sense of their founding myths. They're leaving the religious sphere open to all comers. Now, what this means is that when Western elites and so-called professed elites say that they are simply no better than any other group, although value signaling would have something different to say about that. There's no sense of the founding myths of Christianity, of Greek traditions, of Jewish, Hebrew traditions, of the Industrial Revolution, the importance of the individual, all the other things that are part of the founding myth of Western society, including, incidentally, getting rid of slavery, and also spreading liberty around the world. One of the unsung benefits of British colonialism was that the countries that they subordinated to their interests largely live free lives now in political organizations devoted to liberty that otherwise they would never have achieved or being given the opportunity to share in it. When the elites give up their founding myths, then it leaves a culture open to the fads and the what would you call them? The fads, the motivations of the moment, the contemporary motifs that get built into kind of social reality. These waves of conformatism and so forth that we can experience these days as political correctness. Transgenderism, for example, would be another one. Also the myth of the noble savage too as well. So all of a sudden Western culture is up for grabs. And it's up for grabs by any group that has a founding myth that is still held strongly and whose members are willing to make it happen, shall we say. And in this case, probably the most dangerous one at the moment, well, the most dangerous two at the moment, are Muslims with their founding myths of Muhammad and the totalitarian need to ensure that Allah is obeyed across the world, no matter, and to eliminate all other cultures, simply because theirs is the most perfect of all cultures. So this is a founding myth that's very energizing to a number of Muslim people, and the expression of this comes out in terrorism, it comes out in political activity, it comes out in a variety of things like car. the gradual infiltration of the West by people with a very non-Western attitude towards what it means to be human and how human affairs should be managed. The other takeover is through what is now currently known as the progressives. And the progressives have a founding myth that's basically Marxist. It's economics, although nowadays it's evolved, shall we say, into critical realism, or it's evolved into critical theory, which puts down everything according to power relationships. And this is also a founding myth, the socialist founding myth, that there's equality of results, not as kind of a Western mentality would have it, an equality of initial starting conditions, but an equality of results. This also is a founding myth, and it's played by people who adhere to it. It's very, very strong, and it's politically motivating. This is not to say that the old religious Western mentality has disappeared. It is just that the elites have forsaken it. A lot of the global institutions, we shall talk about a bit later, are deeply involved in this type of kind of deconstructionism. And the progressives are also making their changes to fundamentally transform society. But it turns out that a lot of people in society do not want to be fundamentally transformed. That in holding to practical beliefs in the individual and religious affiliation and so forth, what used to be the founding myths of Western culture is still there. And they're still now beginning to react to these efforts to fundamentally transform their society into one that to them is unrecognizable. It's actually a degradation of what it means to be human. So these are some of the fundamental institutional changes that are currently taking place. There are more. As we get into our actual study of the news, then we're going to work on identifying the specific parameters, the specific ways in which things like this are operating. Maybe there's other factors too as well. So this is just our initial starting point when it comes to understanding how the transcendental realm sublates the core realm of institutionals. So with that, I give you thanks at the end of day 5.